Probably heard about e-cigarettes, specifically pod-based ones like Juul, Smoke, Enjoy, and Puff Bar. They've grown in popularity, but many users believe that these are harmless devices. We're going to talk about today why many health professionals are concerned about these new delivery services. E-cigarettes are made of a battery, an atomizer with a heating coil, and an absorbent material that absorbs a liquid that can contain nicotine flavoring and chemicals. The battery allows the atomizer to heat the liquid, called e-juice, which creates aerosol that is breathed into the lungs and then breathed out into the air. Some of these devices are preloaded and some require the user to add the e-juice. The original e-cigarettes were shaped just like cigarettes and came preloaded and were disposable. Now later and newer cigarettes and vape devices either looked like pens or contained more bulky battery packs known as mods. The anatomy of a pod-based e-cig. These e-cigs contain two components, the part on the left, which is the power source and contains the battery, the part on the right, which is the small pod or cartridge. A cartridge is reported to produce 20 puffs of aerosol and comes in a variety of different flavored e-juices, all with an alarming amount of nicotine. These flavors and cartridge colors are concerning since they attract young people. Each Juul pod is packed with 4.13 milligrams of nicotine, which is equal to the amount of nicotine that the body can take in from smoking up to 2 packs of cigarettes. A fixed pod contains almost twice that amount, 75 milligrams. This is concerning because we know the developing teen brain is very sensitive to nicotine and prone to addiction. A pod holds the e-juice in its outer shell. When plugged into the battery piece, it is heated to produce aerosol, which is invasive to your lungs. Our biggest concern with pod-based e-cigarettes among young people is that they can deliver up to the same amount of nicotine released from 1.5 to 3.5 packs of cigarettes. All salt-based e-juice liquid contains nicotine. For example, Juul pods, Puff bars, and Eon sticks all contain salt-based nicotine. For products with salt-based nicotine can allow more frequent use, increasing their potential for addiction, and the feeling is less harsh on your throat. Each Juul pod contains 4.13 milligrams of nicotine, which is extremely high compared to other tobacco and nicotine products. A Puff bar holds even more nicotine, 50 milligrams that is, while an Eon stick is loaded with 68 milligrams of nicotine. If you aerosoled the same amount of e-juice, but with the most concentrated free-base nicotine, it would equal to 25 milligrams of nicotine. Juul pods, Puff bars, and Eon sticks are disposable and not made to be refilled, unlike other e-cigs and vape devices that can be refilled. This further contributes to plastic and toxic pollution in the environment, which are both public health concerns. Although some e-juices may feel like they're safer, all salt-based e-juices contain nicotine. What does addiction feel like? The throat hit or irritation on the throat is the body's way of saying, hey, this air does not feel normal in my throat. I should not be breathing this in. Cigarette users become tolerant of this feeling over time and even associate it with the feeling of a hit of nicotine. Juul Labs maintain that they are for adults who wanted to quit smoking cigarettes. If that's the case, wouldn't they want their device to irritate the throat since smokers associate it with bringing nicotine into their body? Let's just say they were interested in attracting new, non-smoker consumers, aka young people. They simply studied how cigarette companies spent decades manipulating nicotine to maintain addiction. Juul's nicotine salt formula mimics the nicotine salt activities developed by R.J. Reynolds, the creators of Newport and Camel, which are cigarette companies. In other words, this reduced harshness on the throat has allowed Juul to deliver more nicotine to young people without their bodies rejecting it as easily. The flavors also make it seem friendly and attractive, and that can make it seem non-threatening. For those who haven't inhaled aerosol with nicotine salt, let's look at an analogy to wrap our heads around it. Let's say you picked up a soda that had way more sugar than you wanted. You would most likely be turned off by its extreme sweetness. Well, let's say the soda companies manipulated the soda liquid, so when you had the same sugary drink, you wouldn't feel any of those sensations. They would have succeeded in bypassing your body's alarm systems, just like Juul has with other pod-based companies have done with nicotine salt. For so many years, consumers were told that the clouds made by e-cigs were just water vapor. Do you think that's true? Nope. In reality, the cloud is a mixture of many different chemicals that are either present in the e-liquid before or produced during the heating and atomizing process. A vapor is a chemical that has just evaporated. An aerosol is a mixture of liquid particles suspended in gas and can contain many chemicals. Instead of just mixing the air like a pure gas, aerosols can leave drops behind. Here's a list of chemicals found in regular cigarettes. All of these chemicals have been found in e-pod cigarette-based aerosol. The ones in the orange are known to be harmful and determined by the government, the FDA, to be specific. And while we did not know this at first, many of these are the same chemicals found in traditional cigarettes. Simply put, e-cigarettes produce aerosol that contains many harmful chemicals and toxins, some known to cancer. Nicotine itself is a highly addictive compound, and while not all contain nicotine, all have this many chemicals and toxins. What's in that pod? Based on what we know about e-juice and cigarette liquid, what chemicals would you specifically find in these pods? Let's look at the ingredients that Juul Labs report as being known in the Juul pod. Nicotine, the addictive chemical in all pods. Benzoic acid, pairs with nicotine to deliver high amounts of nicotine to the brain. Glycerol and propane glycol, common ingredients found in most e-juices. Propane glycol is not approved by the government for inhaling. Other chemicals include natural oils, extracts, and flavors. What do they mean by extracts and flavors? What else is in this? Well, scientists started to look at all the chemicals in a Juul pod e-juice. Guess what? They found these 59 chemicals when they looked at all the pod flavors. Why wouldn't they want us to know this? Maybe this will help you answer the question. All of the names in red represent chemicals that are corrosive, irritants, harmful, toxic, and dangerous to the environment. And then all the ones you see in orange are chemicals that are harmful, and those in light blue represent chemicals that are irritants. Recently, a Harvard University study found that a toxin named gluten was found in Juul pods. Gluten is commonly found in the outer layer of fungus or fungi. Gluten is known for causing inflammation of airways in the lungs, which can lead to a long-term lung disease. Secondhand aerosol. Secondhand aerosol, similar to secondhand smoke, is the plume of chemicals released into the environment directly from an e-pod and e-cigarette pod-based device from the lungs of the user. Common places for the exposure to secondhand aerosol include restaurants, vehicles, and designated smoking areas. The chemicals that are released include harmful substances such as nicotine, heavy metals, ultrafine particles that fall deep into the lungs, cancerous chemicals, and volatile organic compounds, aka VOCs. Exposure can lead to cancer, respiratory infections, and make someone's asthma worse. Another way that e-cigarettes and vape pens pose a danger to people other than the user is through third-hand aerosol. Third-hand aerosol is the mixture of chemicals in an e-cigarette vape pen aerosol that remains on the surface and in dust even after the aerosol is gone and react with other chemicals in the environment to form toxic chemicals. Small children are especially at risk for third-hand aerosol exposure because they tend to put things in their mouths and have more vulnerable skin. In the recent past, e-liquid was federally unregulated and often mislabeled. When many of the juices were tested, some claimed that to have had nicotine in them, and the amount that they said they had was not always true. While we are starting to see a bit of local and school regulations, there are zero guidelines corporations must follow regarding these products. Since there are no federal regulations on these products, there are no child safety precautions on the caps, making them dangerous to others besides the user. Two of the most common ways the e-cigarette industry represents the amount of nicotine in e-juice is in milligrams per milliliter or percent of nicotine by weight. The labeling of nicotine content is inconsistent, sometimes represented by milligrams or milliliters, and sometimes not labeled at all. This means there is a higher value in more nicotine, but 5% on these boxes is misleading. 5% is a small number, and it just says 5% strength. 5% strength of what? Exactly how much is 5%? Remember, a Juul pod contains 4.3 million grams of nicotine. If you don't know, a standard pack of cigarettes contains 20 cigarettes. This is 1 milligram of nicotine per absorption per cigarette, so about 20 milligrams of nicotine is delivered to the body from smoking a whole pack of cigarettes. Unlike other e-juices, which may or may not contain nicotine, all salt-based e-juice contains nicotine. According to Juul Labs, one Juul pod contains 41.3 milligrams of nicotine. This is an example of how much nicotine you'll find in about 40 cigarettes. As mentioned before, this is a high amount of nicotine and can be intense for first-time users. Our concern is that young people are being introduced to a high amount of nicotine, developing a tolerance quickly, and becoming addicted as a result of this. One puff bar contains 50 milligrams of nicotine, which is equivalent to 50 cigarettes. How many packs of cigarettes would a puff bar then be equal to? About 2.5 packs. One Suratone Vagan cartridge contains about 90 milligrams of nicotine, or 90 cigarettes worth. How many packs of cigarettes would this pod be equal to? 4.5 packs. No matter what pod you're using, all of them contain high levels of nicotine, which is extremely addictive, and it keeps you coming back for more. In order to understand how nicotine is so good at creating addiction, we must know how it takes advantage of our brain. The nicotine mimics a chemical that our brain produces naturally and easily binds receptors to the brain that are made for that chemical. When the receptors are filled, it sets off a chain reaction that leads the brain to feel pleasure. Why do you think our brains have evolved to feel pleasure? Pleasure is necessary for survival because it encourages us to do activities that keep us alive, like eating, sleeping, building relationships. However, no matter what kind of device it comes from, nicotine hijacks this pleasure pathway and tricks the brain into interpreting chemical signals as pleasurable and necessary for survival. Continuing to use nicotine will result in addiction. This means nicotine turns your brain against you, so you feel forced to keep using nicotine just to feel normal. One way to think about nicotine is like termites coming into your house. Your home is a structure that is already built and functions perfectly fine. Termites come in and take advantage of the structure, turning the protective shelter into food for their colony. Keep in mind, this effect is no accident. Companies specifically design their products to deliver high levels of nicotine to their users, just like Big Tobacco did with cigarettes. Why do you think addiction is such a great business model? Nicotine doesn't just have effect on your brain. There are receptors all over your body. For example, using nicotine can make your heart beat faster because it triggers your flight or fight response. Nicotine e-salts produce a faster heart rate than other non-nicotine salt e-liquids. Outside of all the chemicals and toxins already in those pods, nicotine can independently cause trouble breathing and damage to the lungs. Nicotine can also increase acid reflux. Last but not least, nicotine can even negatively impact your reproductive organs. Along with the harms from nicotine on its own, we know that there are other health risks from these products. E-cigarette aerosol enters the lungs and leaves the chemical residue behind. The lungs cannot break down these chemicals, so they damage air pathways and the air sacs that bring oxygen into your body. This can increase risk of lung disease. Aerosol has also been shown to damage specific parts of your circulatory system or blood network, increasing your risk for heart disease. Ear, eye, and throat irritation are common among e-cig and vape users. Scientists are still studying how these aerosol chemicals impact your brain. We are only beginning to understand the long-term health effects of using an e-cigarette. It took over 25 years to see the long-term health effects of regular cigarettes, so how long will this take? Every chemical found in an e-cigarette aerosol has not been studied yet. Researchers have identified that there are harmful substances, some even known to cause cancer. A recent study on e-cigarettes found that using them raises someone's risk of developing a long-term lung disease. This means these airways are responsible for engaging air in and out of your lungs. E-symphoma can be developed over time from using e-cigarettes. This is the destruction of air sacs in the lungs, which is a common disease that long-term smokers develop. Alveoli, the air sacs in your lungs, are in the place in your body where fresh oxygen is delivered and carbon dioxide is removed. Other lung diseases linked to e-cigarettes include asthma and chronic diseases. Those who use e-cigarettes and cigarettes are at an even higher risk of developing these diseases or a heart disease compared to someone only using e-cigarettes or cigarettes. Damaging the lung tissue could lead to a chain reaction of other health complications. Less oxygen is sent to your brain means less oxygen to the organs and tissues in the body. Other studies have confirmed that e-cigarettes weakens the lungs' immune system, making it harder for the lungs to fight off harmful bacteria. A hit to the heart. Evidence that e-cigarettes, including products like Juul, create cardiovascular or heart risk piling up. The heart is the center for pumping blood through a complex system of blood vessels in your body. These blood vessels are responsible for delivering fresh oxygen to your organs or tissues. Your cells need oxygen to survive and work properly. Breathing in aerosol from the e-cigarette, even if you aren't the one using it, can lead to blood vessel stiffness and possibly affect your heart's ability to move the oxygen fresh oxygen to your brain, muscles, liver, and other parts of your body. Ultimately, blood vessel stiffness and blood clotting can increase someone's risk for heart attack or heart disease. Risk for a heart attack. Good news. Your risk immediately goes down after you stop smoking or using e-cigarettes. Your risk for a heart attack is determined by the factors such as your genetics and lifestyle. The factors that play a role in your risk for heart attack include family race, history, where you live, and the kind of air you breathe. Choosing not to use tobacco or nicotine reduces your overall risk of heart disease. Let's imagine the chance of having a heart attack is represented by dice, and a higher the total rolled represents higher chance of developing heart disease. Now, someone who does not use e-cigarettes is only rolling with one dice. Imagine this person rolls the dice every day. Their chances of the heart attack would now be double. This is fairly similar to the amount of damage of someone who is smoking cigarettes every day. The reason e-cigarettes are not considered safer than cigarettes, they both release ultrafine particles and toxins that damage blood vessels, encourage blood clotting, and lead to heart attacks. Now let's complicate this further by assuming the person starts using cigarettes as well whenever they don't have access to their vape. Now they're using both e-cigarettes and cigarettes. Their increase for heart attack will increase by fivefold. In other words, they are now gambling with 5 dice. On the bright side, this works the other way too. The risk of heart attack can drop immediately after quitting using e-cigarettes and also quitting after using regular cigarettes. Someone could take action right away to protect their hearts by stopping any e-cigarette or cigarette use. It's important to consider how much every component will impact a young person's health. This device has many pieces that are dangerous to use. This raises concerns in the question, how do all of these parts affect your body and your community? Juul pods, for example, are single-pod plastic pods. Like plastic straws, they take many years to break down and ultimately create more waste. Because e-pods are e-cigarettes and they can leak heavy metals and residual nicotine, they are considered to be biohazard waste and e-waste. We share concern for all pod-based e-cigarettes. There are many reasons why young people start using these devices, such as flavors, changing social norms, life stressors, perceived reduced stress, marketing, and lack of addiction education. The industry is smart in their approach and focuses on these 3 points to produce their agenda and attract young people. Who is going to replace the old smokers? The e-cigarette vape pen industry knows that many of their customers are getting older. Who do you think they see as the new ideal customers? Young people and people your age. People just like you. The e-cigarette vape industry sees young people as perfect replacement. customers. They know that if young people get hooked to their products early in life, they'll have customers for years to come. It's well known by health professionals and the tobacco industry alike. Many current smokers started smoking before adulthood. So take a closer look at the vape pen before you think about vaping. Earlier, we discussed why pod-based companies have many fruity and sweet flavors along with colors. Why would there be over 15,500 flavors? It's important to be aware there's another example of pod-based companies following the same strategies used from Big Tobacco's playbook. They know this is a great way to attract young customers because they are the group most interested in sweet flavors and bright colors. More and more evidence is piling, proving that these flavors are dangerous in and of themselves. So far, we know more flavors can impair lung disease and increase the risk for heart disease. But pod-based companies continue to use them because it makes their products look even more exciting and accessible. The target audience, who is it? Who do you think is being targeted by this ad? Here's another campaign. Who does this person with the short hair look like? How is this blue ad different from the Juul ad? Social media targeting. There has been increasing concerns how young people have been targeted by these Juul and pod-based companies on social media. For example, young social media influencers who use Juul Labs are being paid to promote their products to young people. Even after Juul shut down its Instagram page, they still have an active account that is being tagged in posts daily. What is this ad saying to young people? What about this one? Or this last one? How and why are these messages harmful? What is problematic and trivializing about these devices? What might the industry be okay with online circulation of these cartoons and memes? Social media allows for the industry to have widespread advertising at almost no cost. By sharing these, young people have essentially done the advertising for them. Some of the brands behind these new products are actually the same corporations and products used in traditional cigarettes. The companies that keep selling are Newport's, they now sell Blue, Marlboro used to sell Mark 10, and Camel sells Vuse. They've kept up with products like Juul by releasing their own products in pod-based e-cigarettes. Basically, these big tobacco products corporations are replacing their old cigarette customers with the new ones around your age, hoping they keep you for a lifetime as a customer. Let's wrap up by reviewing some of the ways device companies, especially Juul, have shown themselves and reinvented. They formulate their products to deliver as much nicotine as possible, as smoothly as possible. They introduce flavored products that are known to be attractive and less harmful. They use marketing strategies to attract known teens. Here's one more fact you should know. In March 2019, the leading U.S. cigarette manufacturer purchased a 35% stake in Juul for $12.8 billion. This is a parent company of another cigarette company. There's no doubt that Big Tobacco is transitioning into Big Vape.